Okay, this guy. I absolutely love this guy.
What happened to a gay couple in Gaza?
Executed according to Islamic law. Islam doesn't endorse gayism. Islam doesn't endorse homosexuality. Just like Canada doesn't endorse a lot of things.
So would you like to see Sharia law in Canada replace Canadian law?
At some point it will. Because we have families, we are making babies. Your population is going down the slum, right? And by 2060, according to Pew Research Institute, your research, by 2060, Muslims will be the biggest religious group the world over. What are you going to do then?
Actually,
go post Sharia is even then?
Well, you know what? I'm very appreciative of the honesty. We don't usually get that.
One day we can have a Muslim majority nation here in Canada, right in your face.
We are going to be showing you guys this clip that we just watched again and spend an episode talking about the clip because I think the clip is wonderful for just a number of reasons.
Would you like to know more?
I love the way the guy argues for Islamic value systems. Actually, let's just start with that because I think that's really interesting.
By the way, he doesn't say, this is what I want. This is what we need. He just says, this is what it's going to be.
Yeah, this is what is happening by current statistics.
Yeah, statistics. I love that.
And I would argue that I think he's wrong about the way this is going to play out. But I love the vitalism. And I think that, like, when you are approaching issues of pronatalism, you need to be approaching it like this guy.
Yes.
We might not be on exactly the same team, but I am probably closer to his team than I am to some of the other teams out there right now.
Well, I really appreciate about his mindset too, and I feel this way about so many things, is that, and this is also pervasive in your views of other people and whether or not they matter, is you get to own something, to influence it, to have a say when you are literally building it. And that means that your children will be there representing the future. You're having children, they'll be in the future. Or if you have a problem with a policy, then you get to complain about it if you're trying to fix it. You have a problem with the company, you get to complain about it if you're trying to fix it. But you don't, like, all this whining that takes place online among people who aren't actually doing anything to build it themselves or build something better or change something. They have no say in this.
That is a great point, and I want to expand on it because I hadn't thought of it this way before, but people who have and raise children are building the future and therefore have ownership over that future almost axiomatically.
Yeah.
Where you have far like urban monoculture brain or far like progressive brain, they look at the world through this socialist lens where regardless of the effort that you have put into something, everybody deserves some level of equal say in whatever's happening, i.e. the future of humanity, etc. And even though they aren't putting in the effort to have and raise children, they believe that this normative ethical system that they have built and that is going extinct with them is going to give them the ability to pressure other people into their types of beliefs.
And I think this mindset made sense at one point in human history when people lived in small collective clans or tribes where everyone did inherently play a crucial role. Even if you were a child, you were someone's future old age safety strategy. If no matter who you were providing something, and therefore to feel that you were entitled to the way things were run mattered. I think what people are missing in modern socialist worlds, and America is fairly socialist when you look at the number of social programs we have, and most developed nations seem to be, not Russia as much, not kind of China.
And China has almost no social programs.
Yeah, basically, we're way more socialist than China, which is hilarious. But the way socialism works modernly is the average human citizen, especially one who is benefiting from the state, is actually not contributing in that way. They're not providing any value, and they are primarily a leech. And it is mostly businesses and wealthier taxpayers who are producing and making money, and they have jobs that are really entitled to something. So I think that maybe this mindset evolved in people and culturally was okay in those previous systems where it was almost impossible. Like you wouldn't be alive if you weren't contributing, right? Whereas now that's broken, and yet we haven't changed our culture around that kind of mindset.
But what's important to note is I think people believe that he and his kids will adopt their cultural system.
Oh yeah, their cultural system is enlightened and correct and based on science and all these things.
And it's just, it won't, like the fertility rates even if he has 10 kids and 2 of them adopt your culture and then they have no kids, then they're just going to disappear as well.
Exactly. It's only the ones that maintain this hard culture or a version of it. And of course, there may be a version that is LGBTQ friendly.
But let's talk about his LGBTQIA or whatever statements there, because I thought that they were really interesting. And they do a very good job of signaling that the form of cultural imperialism that he feels from the left, and basically saying that this is not something that you will be able to continue to implement. And if you think you will, you don't understand the cultures you're interacting with. Specifically, the statement that you brought up to me, and I really love this, was, in Canada, you have laws too. He's just saying our laws aren't your laws, but you have laws that can seem arbitrary to other cultural groups, and we have laws that can seem arbitrary to other cultural groups. But in the future, because we're going to be the majority population in this country,
that's what you're going to get. Yeah.
These laws should be the normative laws of this country.
Yeah. And how did he put it? Right in your face. Yeah. Well, what's funny is how both intolerant and pluralistic he comes across at the same time, right? Because on one hand, he's like, yeah, like kill gays, obviously. And then on the other hand, he's like, just like you have beliefs in Canada too, which is great. But then he's, oh, but by the way, we're going to be like, this is the law that's going to govern you in the future.
No, it should be aware that the way that he, and again, you've got to think, too many people think about this like a progressive. They're like, he wants to go out there and kill people. And that's just like no, that is not what he's thinking in his head.
Not at all.
He thinks in his head, what I just want is for people who are born same-sex attracted to either not act on it or become transitioned. Mm-hmm. And interestingly, that aligns with what a lot of progressives these days seem to want anyway. Just transition them. You got a kid who's questioning their gender, just transition them, fixes it, and it's okay with the Islamists. But I also think that this is really interesting, is this denial, and I don't know where it comes from, that this is a part of Islamic culture in the leftist mindset, like the gays for Gaza situation. And I'm very confused by I think they just genuinely think that this is a far right conspiracy that Muslims believe this. Is that what you think it is?
I haven't looked into gays for Gaza, so I honestly don't know, but I can only imagine that they do not understand the full policy at play. Right.
So I think
there could be like a super based view where they're like, no, I support their right to hate gays just as much as I support my right to love gays. Like it could be that. It could be that they're so hyper pluralistic. That's where they're going with this. I don't think so.
No, I don't think that's it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it. It seems more like the same with any sort of Palestine group, which is like, oh, they're just fairly misinformed about Hamas and many other things that are going on. And that's why
I think I understand. So I was just thinking about it from a moment, trying to see this from a truly progressive perspective.
Okay.
They are aware that this is happening, but because they don't trust the media when it comes to negative facts about Muslim cultural groups, they assume that it's being overreported and it's only small groups of rural extremists. And they also think that they live in a country where gays are being killed all the time for being gay. So from their perspective, oh, there's small rural extremists over there that do this. There's small rural extremists over here that do this. And for both of those rural extremist communities, we will eventually convert them to our way of seeing things because their culture doesn't have a right to exist and we should extinguish it. And so when they look at them, they don't see a Muslim cultural group. They see brown people who are future converts to their cultural group. And in light of them being brown people and being the weaker side of a conflict, they are inherently slated for a higher status position within the larger progressive power hierarchy.
No questions asked.
Yeah, which also makes them think that these individuals are like intrinsically sort of high status and won't have a problem with this. Like they don't mind their imperialism or their plans to wipe out this cultural group because they are like, yeah, we'll extinguish their cultural group, but we'll give their actual children positions of status within this new order that we're creating. And therefore, there's nothing unethical about it. The problem is just it doesn't work. Woke ideas have not spread very far in the Islamist world. You don't have, when you have Pride Week and stuff like that, there's always the famous sign where they show all the Western companies' logos for Pride Week, Western accounts, and then they show all their Middle Eastern accounts, and you see nothing. This isn't to say that their cultures aren't susceptible to this, but I think that often when they hit this, they lose a lot more of their culture than even Westerners do. What I mean by that is that when Muslim children are taken by the urban monoculture, more of their original cultural practices and beliefs and perspectives are erased than when progressives are taken by the urban monoculture. And I should also note here that there are different Muslim cultural groups, and there are some Muslim cultural groups that take a much more soft perspective to their religion and don't have these incredibly strict restrictions against things like the LGBT community. However, those cultural groups typically have much lower fertility rates, and so don't really matter in terms of this conversation.
That's the problem.
Any further thoughts on this particular point, Simone?
No, I'm with you on that. It's just, I think it's a wake-up call to LGBT groups that if you want a future that supports open gay marriages and even just relations, you got to figure out demographic collapse stat, because he's so right. He's just right, and he states it plainly. And I think that's the other thing about pronatalism, which really sucks, is that the people who are going to create a future that everyone blames us for trying to create as pronatalists, right? Like, you're going to make a Handmaid's Tale, you're going to take away people's rights, you're going to take away reproductive rights, all these things. Like, that is, anyone who does support those things is just very quiet, because they know that's the default. Anyone who's talking about this openly, they're talking about it because they're not super cool with the default. And what I love about what this guy is just saying, like, openly on the streets, is just like that he's showing the default in a way that I don't think anyone else is, because any other group that knows this to be true isn't going to talk about it.
Yeah. Now, here's where he's wrong. The future is not Muslim. Yes, Muslims will be the dominant world religion eventually. I think that's pretty obvious from the current statistics. But Muslims have a higher fertility rate than other regions because, so first we should note there are multiple Muslim cultural groups. Some of these groups I think are more American than most Americans. For example, I find the Persian Muslim cultural group, I always joke that if you like Trump, you like Persians. Like, he is very Persian coded to me, much more than he's coded as like a WASP or something like that. Very entrepreneurial, very American in many ways. There's many different Muslim groups that are just like really American, or in other ways, groups that I identify with. But then there's also, what I would say is that there's a high correlation, though, between how much a Muslim cultural group is one of the cultural groups that I have a cultural affinity to and how low their fertility rate is. Because typically the groups I have a higher affinity to being lower fertility.
Unfortunately, because we are socially much more progressive than your typical conservative.
Yeah, but I would note here, no, I don't think that's the only reason. I think that there's another reason. Islam is not, as a religion, particularly protective of fertility rates.
As we see
between religious communities, different levels of fertility protection based upon the income that group achieves. And for example, we contrast like Catholics and Orthodox Christians, which typically have lower fertility rates when contrasted when held constant with income, with Protestant groups, which typically have much higher fertility rates, and Jewish groups, which typically have much higher fertility rates when held at the same level of income as like Catholic and Orthodox groups. If you put Muslim groups into this spectrum, they are not as bad as Catholic and Orthodox groups, but they're only a smidge better. They're certainly not up with the Jewish groups. They're certainly not up with the Protestant groups. And so then people are like, why do some Muslim groups have such high fertility rates? And it is because they engage in cultural practices that lower their economic potential, which means that because they're at this lower economic potential, they're producing more kids. Remember, we're if I'm saying at the same economic level, most Muslim cultural groups actually are just not that high fertility. You can cheese that by lowering the economic potential of a group.
Those groups, therefore, are not going to be able to rule the future because they are dependent on more productive groups to either maintain their lifestyles or maintain their governments and infrastructure. So what people are missing is a lot of people are like, but Hamas will just take over Israel. That's the correct thing. It's their land, whatever. But Hamas literally had a plan to enslave the most productive, high-producing Jews in Israel. That was
they understood that they had that.
Like, we have to keep them. We have to keep them.
Gaza had no economic value to them, and the land of Israel had no economic value to them. The Jews were the thing of economic value, and they would only win if they enslaved them.
Yeah, and then people also are constantly talking, but in Europe, like, all these refugee groups have super high, like, rates of reproduction. Their birth rates are way higher. They're going to replace everyone else. If that happens, those countries, those nations, and they don't change their lifestyles, if they don't become the economic producers and taxpayers of those nations, will become completely hamstringed. They won't function, and those nations will not have influence on the future. So again, like, what you're arguing, in other words, is for anyone to have influence over the future, they have to be economically productive and technologically engaged to a certain extent. And once most groups become economically productive and engaged, unless they have some unique, good, hard culture technology to protect them from lowering fertility, which Islam doesn't, then they will see lower birth rates.
Even Muslim groups.
Even Muslim groups, yeah.
You go to your Muslim friends who have PhDs or who work on Wall Street, they are very low fertility. And we have a lot of Muslim friends in this category. They are very low fertility. And you actually, a really interesting thing that you pointed out is you're like, in these Muslim majority countries, who's actually like running the economies in the industry? You go to the UAE, you go to Saudi Arabia, you go to Qatar, and who's actually putting in the legwork to operate a lot of these companies? It's not people from the Muslim cultural groups. It's often people who are imported from India or the United States. And even as they grow, functionally, the decisions, who decides where Saudi Aramco's capital is invested, it's mostly a room full of Jews and white people, okay? So the actual power of these giant Islamic states is still fundamentally being made by other cultural groups.
So what you're saying essentially is that Islamic groups still have to figure out how, in the face of modernity, wealth, and high education, they're going to maintain high fertility rates, because that hasn't been figured out. And that's the subtext under this clip that is not being discussed. Everyone just takes it for granted that, oh, of course, yeah, there will be more Muslims than anyone else in the future because they're the only ones who are still having kids. That's very similar to the same arguments that we hear from people who are like, oh, it just means that we're just going to have Africans in the future because they're the only ones who are still having lots of kids. No, both of these groups have not figured out how to maintain high birth rates once they develop, once they see more wealth, once they gain the influence that we would love to see them gain. That's the interesting thing. And I think that's under-discussed in prenatalist discussions.
Yeah, and I think this is, you look at Gaza, and everyone's always talking about, look at how big the population of Gaza is. Look at how big the population of Gaza is. One of the densest areas to live in the world. And then you look at that, and yeah, but nobody thinks that Gaza has a real shot at winning against Israel. Like, why is that the case? Because it's not about population size. It's about the economic productivity of a population. And so you can cheese people all you want. Now,
numbers help. Numbers aren't nothing, but numbers can also be a liability. Once you have a lot of people in a country who are very dissatisfied, not getting enough food, not getting any security, you're going to have a revolution. You're going to have a complete mess. So yes, humans are a strength, they're a liability. It's not the answer.
Yeah. So within every community, I always feel like it's up for the communities to find a way to save themselves. And when we did our Catholic episode, we're like, the core Catholic problem is an inability to motivate fertility among their members. That is the core Catholic problem. And if they can't find a way to change that, and this is even true of religiously devout Catholics, by the statistics, as we've shown, they're in trouble. Muslims actually have a different problem. The Muslim problem is much more around how to ensure economic and technological productivity amongst the iterations of their culture that are high fertility. Because if they don't do that, here's what's going to happen. you are going to begin to see countries that have been taking in lots of Muslim immigrants begin to become politically, because many of these lower economic potential, high fertility Muslim cultural subgroups do believe they have, as this man stated, an ethical incentive to ensure that Sharia law is the law of the land and the countries that they live in. And they are going to begin implementing that within other countries. Once this is done, basically the first time in a country that formerly would have been a developed world country, it's gonna be very much like when Putin attacked the Ukraine, where everyone's, oh, this is actually a threat. And then other countries, whether it's the US, et cetera, are going to have a large political and likely empowered faction within them that believes that they have a political mandate to deal with a population, or the Muslim population in their country, that they believe could undergo this same transformation if it continues to grow. And that's where you're going to get real and violent bloodshed against Muslim cultural groups that wouldn't do that. That is the real threat within the Muslim world, where if you're from one of these more, you're like, well, I'm from one of the more like progressive-y Muslim cultural subgroups, right? Like one of the more technologically engaged, economically engaged. Fine. Your biggest threat is the extremist Muslims. Because if they win everywhere, there's going to be other factions that assume that you are part of their mandate. And that is a unique cultural problem to have. Catholics have it to some extent, because there's definitely Catholic groups that follow the syllabus of errors that we talked about Pope Pius IX putting out, which is basically a Catholic version of Sharia law that basically says that once Catholics reach a certain population within a country, they have a mandate to enact Catholic religious, like a theocracy basically, that mandates Catholic value systems. And so individuals who follow this, the reason why this isn't really a threat to Catholics is because Catholics that are religiously observant are so low fertility that there really isn't a threat of them becoming a dominant political faction in any country, or not anytime soon at least. But if they ever did and they enacted this, then every other country would see the Catholic minority population as a threat. And this is why it is so dangerous culturally to take one of these stances. It like seems really cool and tough. And I have people online will front, we want a country that's ruled under my value system. And it's like, you really don't want that. Because if you win in like small Malta, now all of a sudden there's a mandate to get rid of anyone who looks like they might be part of your culture pretty much everywhere else in the world where you're not a majority yet.
Yeah, then you become a threat. And this is very similar to your argument about AI. When you make it such that any other group will have to eliminate you if you exist, then you're going to have to try to eliminate them. And yeah, we don't want to create a world like that for AI or for different cultural groups and religious groups.
This is the thing about having a pluralist framing. I think so many people see our drive towards pluralism as downstream of still having like latent progressive or urban monoculture values, or like aesthetically valuing pluralism.
That we want pluralism because it's good and the rainbow faces is such a nice thing to see.
Yeah, and that is just very foolish. I think we see pluralism as a strategy. Pluralism, especially in a world of collapsing fertility rates, where fertility rates are higher, often in more diverse countries when you're controlling for wealth, as we often point out. You look at really non-diverse countries like South Korea or Japan or China, and you see an unusually low fertility rate. You look at really diverse countries, states, and you see unusually higher fertility rates. This is likely because believing you have an existential threat near you, not for progressive reasons, but like a cultural group that is genuinely different from yours and in competition with yours, seems to increase fertility rates. I often say that if you, one really interesting cultural dynamic that we may see is certain Muslim and Jewish populations living side by side, out competing other populations in cash adjusted fertility rates, because each group, and I'm not talking about the type of Muslim and Jewish populations that don't hate each other. I'm talking about the type that do hate each other. That creates a synergistic. I actually think that's why both Israel and Gaza's fertility rates were so unusually high, was because they did believe there was an existential threat. So much so that it likely offsets in both countries the deaths that will be associated with this particular conflict in terms of the motivated fertility before and after this conflict,
Gosh.
which is really interesting.
I don't know if it's necessarily out of this drive to beat the competition. I think a lot of it is similar to what you've seen with typhoons in Southeast Asia killing villages, where like researchers found that birth rates were higher when you were in a village that was uniquely devastated and saw a uniquely high loss of life. So I think there's also just something about birth rates that responds to tragedy, where you're just like, I need hope, I need children. You know,
I hear that, but I think that probably the bigger influencer is on the competing cultural subgroup. If we lived in a culturally diverse environment and those cultures had no level of antagonism towards each other, I do not think they would reinforce the other group's fertility rate. I think you need a cultural diversity with a level of healthy competitive antagonism. I think obviously it can go too far. I think that what's going on with Gaza right now is obviously at a completely unhealthy obsession.
We're talking about football game rivalry, not.
We're talking about Protestants and Catholics in the United States. I think that's a good level of cultural antagonism. Or our podcast, probably the way that our podcast sometimes talks about other groups. I see respect for them existing, but I do not
trash talking. We like trash talking. We don't like raping. We don't do that.
Yeah, like I really don't mind being in an environment where Catholics talk about like the ways that our family breeds, like with IVF and genetic selection and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, it's horrible, you're monsters. But they're not coming and killing us. I'm like, that's a good level of cultural competition there, because then
they're trying to have our kids taken away. There's sometimes when they
go too far. No, I agree, but I don't think that's religious people doing that. I think that's the urban monoculture. I think the people calling CPS are all urban monocultures. These are not Catholic moms. I think but when I see like the Catholics being like, oh, you guys are monsters, everything like that, it motivates me to have more kids and to solidify my culture and to steal my culture, because I am reminded that my neighbors are the other.
Or you're reminded what you stand for and why you stand for it too. I think when people criticize you, you socially are incentivized to question, am I right here? Do I actually want to stand with what I'm standing with if I'm going to catch all this shit for it? And then if you do decide that you want to hold your ground, you're going to be even more dedicated to your stance because you've thought through it and you've committed to it despite the cost. So I think that's also at play.
Many Catholics are going to be the same as us. They watch our podcast and they see something that's so culturally distinct from them. One, it's interesting because it's a unique perspective, in the same way that I really like watching like responses to our Catholic videos, because they give me a unique perspective that I have a very hard time emulating. Like Catholic arguments are very difficult for me to emulate. I can go through it. They'll be like, oh, this one saint back at this time said giving fellatio was a sin. And in these ways, IVF is like fellatio.
Wait, are people comparing IVF?
Yeah, I was going through the Discord arguments and I was like, this is very odd. Like I genuinely, but it's
supposed to be discussed in the Discord. You got to keep including links to that in the description.
But it was a very Catholic-like way of engaging with it, to go back to someone who is a historically respected intellectual and try to apply their reasoning to a modern context. And I love that. I love that because it's something I never, ever would have considered doing myself. And so I can learn from that. But I think that when these people are horrified by us, they're motivated to, for their own cultural groups. I think that this is just the pluralism that we advocate for is not because I think it's good that Muslims ban their kids from same-sex relationships. I wouldn't do that for my kids. But I don't think I have the right to, within Muslim families, say that they should be handling their family separately. And so I think that because of that, so long as they are not one of the groups that wants to institute Sharia law, and we can talk about these groups in just a second, because of that, I am further motivated to create a culture where my kids can make that choice, but building the future means having the kids. Now, in regards to the groups that actually do want to create Sharia law, and as soon as they become the majority, I think that these individuals, and keep in mind, they don't just exist within Muslim populations. Some exist within, for example, Catholic populations. We were talking about the syllabus of errors, and they exist within a few different, some evangelicals fall into this framework. These groups are an absolutely existential threat to our group. I do not know how we're realistically going to deal with these groups. Like, some people in the server were like, what are you guys going to do if IVF is banned in the district that you live or in the region that you live? And the
Obviously,
answer would
travel
be
for it. So
moot.
many people already travel for IVF. People
Yeah.
travel all the way from China to do IVF in the United States for various reasons. People have to travel to the United States for surrogacy as well to do IVF because they can't do it in other countries. You just do what, and this is the same with issues like abortion. This is going to be the same if people ban things like PGTP. They're just going, basically, it means that those who have the means or the dedication to do it, they'll still get it done. And those who are ambivalent about it won't. And will we have enough money to travel to other nations? It'll strain us. But when we did all our rounds of IVF, we literally lived on a mattress in a studio apartment in Doral, Florida. Like, it was fine. I think that's what it's going to come down
Yeah,
to.
we make it work. And I think that's what it means to be an economically productive cultural group, in that we're never genuinely afraid of not having money. We will always find out how to make something work because we are productive.
Yeah, actually, that's an interesting theme. Maybe it deserves its own conversation someday, that when people argue that money is the reason why they can't do something, it really means that they don't have enough dedication to do it. Because money can obviously make things easy for people who are ambivalent, but when you are extremely dedicated to making something happen, you make it work regardless of your level of resources.
Yeah, but also you can play this out. They're like, okay, yeah, but what if they ban like you from coming back if you've done this? Like they absolutely ban.
Yeah, because then you're like
any
marked
form
as a murderer
of genetic selection from being in your country. And the answer is that then people of our cultural group leave this country.
Yeah.
And if we turn out to be an intergenerationally very high fertility cultural group while maintaining our economic and technological productivity, that is a very bad move for the people who have banned us.
Yeah.
For two reasons. One is that they've lost any productivity that they could have gotten, very much like when the Nazis scared away all the nuclear scientists to the United States who were disproportionately Jewish. But then two, then you've got people who can be used by groups that hate you to build their nuclear bombs, which then come back and hit your country. The Axis powers, they put the Jewish scientists in the hands of the Americans, which built nuclear bombs, which then ended up being dropped on Japan, right? Like the Axis powers. If groups go around and they say anybody who engages with genetics or something like that, we're going to go and we're going to exterminate you, then what happens? Then these individuals leave. And these individuals would be a great asset. Remember when we were talking about some of these competing power structures that don't mind funding outsiders, to a group like Saudi Arabia or like the UAE that might want to fund these types of experiments, to maybe act on something in the future. And this is just incredibly stupid to do. Not that we would do that. Like, I wouldn't engage with that sort of stuff, but I suppose it depends on how aggressive the groups are going after me. If I feel like America becomes the type of country where it is always an existential risk to people of my basically cultural ethno group, then am I going to want to build defenses to that using the arbitrage that I have? And what's the arbitrage that I would always have access to? It's genetic technology, because so it's just stupid. Like, it's a culturally stupid strategy. And there is a reason why you shouldn't go after the scientists first, especially when they have somewhere else to go, because then it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend thing.
Exactly.
Which is, again, a lot of the positions that I think people can misunderstand of ours as being urban monoculture influenced are actually just strategic. And because we're thinking long term and they're thinking about like the current conservative social aesthetic.
Yeah, we support the things they support, just not for the reasons they do.
Sometimes. Anyway, love you, Simone.
I love you too, gorgeous.
And this guy is so based. We should have him on sometime if he's open to come on. I love just how he's spitting facts here.
Yeah, but not seemingly with malice or hatred or xenophobia. It's just matter of fact. And I love that. Just
this is going to happen. What are you guys talking about?
It's great. It's great. Good job, sir.
All right. Bye.
Bye.